The ability to essentially take content that you create, even content that you created in the past, and be able to throw it into AI to turn it into different modalities, which is the big thing with AI, as opposed to having to spend time crafting it this way and that way, is take what you've already got and use AI to do a lot of the legwork and heavy lifting of shifting it into a different modality to support what you need, especially with things like alt text image or alt text for images. That's a big one, as well as one of the things I was going to show you all was being able to take things like tables and convert them to lists. That's one of the big issues that I see in things like syllabi and that sort of stuff, where there's data that's been put into a table, not necessarily because it's a tabular or because it's tabular data, but because whoever's creating it likes the way it looks organized in a table. And so you can use something like a generative AI to give it that image, and it can take the data from that image and actually put it into a traditional list that's easier for a screen reader to sort of move through. Or even taking stuff that's in a list or in a paragraph and chunking it so it's easier for someone with a cognitive disability to be able to sort of perceive or understand easier. So that's one of the big things that generative AI can do, is simply taking the text and content that you already have and preparing it in a different way or in a different modality. And it's not necessarily saying, hey, I'm taking what this is and I'm creating an answer. It's more just saying, I'm going to take this and I'm going to shift the way this appears, or I'm going to change the way in which this is organized. And then you, as the content creator, have the ability to say, yes, I like that, or no, I don't like that. And you can do that with ChatGPT. You can do that with Copilot. You can do that with some of the integrations in Google Sheets, in Google Docs. It just gives you a lot of flexibility to say, hey, this is what I have in natural language, and how can we play around with this to morph it into another form that works for what I want to do. And that's a lot of what I was going to show you all, using things like Copilot and ChatGPT. And then you can actually do that if you want to. If you have a ChatGPT account, you can just grab an image and add that image, upload that image into ChatGPT and have it generate the text for you. Or there's another really popular one that we're going to look at. And I think, Amy, could you post the link to it in the chat, which is the ASU alt text generator? And actually, one of the things that I like doing too is, because a lot of times what I'm doing is I'm creating content in Markdown. And so the way I work with stuff is Markdown is essentially, it's like markup, but it's a way to rapidly create content. And so I work a lot with text, because text is easily manipulated. It can be converted into an image. It can be added to video. You can manipulate and play with it a lot. And so I'll usually start with text whenever I'm creating content, and then I can convert it out into whatever format I want. And so with Markdown, and there's tons of tutorials in Markdown out there, basically you'll use a hash, or for those of you that grew up using Twitter or whatever it is, X now, they call a hashtag. It was called a hash or a pound sign before then. Hash denotes a heading level 1. So you can create your semantic structure using hashes, asterisks for bullets. 2 hashes mean a heading level 2, 3 mean a heading level 3. But you can rapidly sort of outline and create the semantic structure for your content. And then I use a tool, or used to use a tool called Pandoc, to convert that Markdown document into a PowerPoint presentation or a Word document or an HTML document. And with generative AI, you can grab that Markdown and actually just have the generative AI convert it into HTML for you. So I know for me, a lot of times, if I've got a syllabus, I'll craft it in this Markdown format, and then I need it in a PDF format to be able to upload for, here in Texas, House Bill 2504. So I need an HB 2504 syllabus, which needs to be in a PDF format. I need maybe a Word document that, we're going to house here on campus, or, in the department that we're going to be able to print out easily. I need a HTML version that I'm going to drop into Canvas. And so what I can do is I can take that Markdown and I could say, hey, ChatGPT, I need this converted to HTML. Can you go ahead and just take this Markdown, give me the HTML code for it? I can then take that HTML fragment, drop it into the editor of Canvas, and bam, it's already formatted everything for me. I can then take that same markdown and give it to Copilot in Microsoft Word and say, hey, take this and go ahead and convert it to Word formatted document, and it handles that for me. PowerPoint will do the same thing. Actually, Google Docs, you can throw Markdown directly into a Google document, and as long as you've turned that feature on, it'll automatically convert it into heading level 1s and 2s as it would normally be formatted in Google Docs. So, but that's one of the big things with generative AI is it does a lot of that formatting and conversion for you, which is the big thing with generative AI. I was going to show some of that to you all had I been on, and then open it up for questions and sort of have an opportunity for people to ask questions, talk about what workflow people have struggled with, and open it up for people to play around, see what questions you have, test out different things, that sort of stuff. So.
Right now, Teresa is sharing her screen and she's testing the same image of a vibrant chameleon in 3 different, in ChatGPT, in the ASU one, and then Arpita shared alttext.ai as another AI generator, and we're just kind of checking out to see how different they are. ChatGPT seems to be a little bit frozen. The ASU one provides a long description and as well as an alt text. Alt text would be what you would put into Canvas, for example, generally speaking. But again, going back to that human in charge, you'd want to edit it. So ChatGPT said close up of a colorful chameleon on a pink flower petal, vibrant blue, green, and rainbow hues. And it's kind of still going there, but it seems a little frozen.
You notice the main thing that I did is when I got my first detailed description, I said, can you make this less than 150 characters? Because, really with alt text, you want to try to keep the alternative text shorter, if at all possible. If you need something longer, then alternative text may not be what you want to do. You may want to describe the image, either above it or below it in a caption, so to speak, more so than alt text. But I do like the fact that it gave you a long description, and then it does go ahead and tell you this would be better for alt text. But again, you want to check it because depending on what the context is, that may or may not be a good alternative text for that image. David, you were mentioning some other tools. I just recently was testing Microsoft's Stream server, which basically, if you have Office 365, which guys, we do have it, okay? In your OneDrive, you can upload a video. And then once that video is uploaded, there is a caption generator that's a part of their Stream server that will go through and it'll create a transcript or do auto computer generated captions for you. Now, again, like all, auto computer generated captions, they're not perfect. They may not even be in what we would consider the realm of accessibility, which is really around 99% accessible or accurate. But it's a good place to start. If you have no other way of getting something captioned, you can get it captioned very quickly that way. And then you can go back through and check those captions to make sure that they really do align and synchronize with the spoken word that's in your video. I think that's just another tool that you could look at. And I'm kind of experimenting with it to see how it's doing. I've done some shorter videos with it that it seems to do really well with. And I just recently plugged in one that was like a 2-hour video, and it took a really long time for it to generate the alt text, but it was still faster than a lot of paid for services. But I haven't yet checked to see how accurate it was. So just another alternative out there.
One thing I do want people to be aware of is with a lot of these services, especially if you're not paying, if you're using the free version, be mindful of FERPA and HIPAA. Do not put student data up there. Use this for converting content, personally identifiable information out there whenever you're using these tools, because it's just like putting it up on the internet. So whenever you're using these tools, use data, or use content that you're okay with it. If it were out in the public, you would be fine with it being out in the public. That there are tools that you can use if you're paying for it, then technically that content is supposed to be not used to retrain the model. It is supposed to stay on your device. And that's part of the push that they're making with a lot of these new chips, the things like the Lunar Lake chips from Intel, where a lot of the processing for the AI workloads are going to be handled on the actual machine and not actually sent out to be processed in the cloud. So a lot of your heavy AI workloads, generative AI workloads, that's handled outside your actual computer and gets sent across the internet. So be aware of that when you've got a question of data that might be protected under HIPAA or FERPA.
That's a really good point, and I'm glad that you did bring that up. That was actually a discussion that we had as instructional designers the other day with things like ChatGPT, and the fact that you don't necessarily want to take like a student's assignment that they turned in and throw that into ChatGPT to do grading or something of that nature. It may sound like a great idea, but again, so many of those free tools, you're actually, like we do with all of our free tools, if we're not reading those terms of agreement, a lot of times we're basically signing our life away. We're saying you can take anything I have and use it any way you want. And if you don't really pay attention to that, then certainly you could be violating some of those kind of privacy acts that we want to be cognizant of. So there are a lot of areas of artificial intelligence that we do need to kind of think through. But I do love the ideas that you presented as far as, ways to come up with heading structure for your documents, whether that be a Canvas page or a Word document or a Google Doc, and chunking that information. Something that we'll talk about in our Universal Design Champion is how important it is, why it's so important to have heading structure in documents for students. And it's not just for blind students, really all students benefit from it. Certainly our neurodivergent students benefit from the chunking of information, where you don't have so much information thrown at you all at once. You kind of have it with some subtitles, so you know when you go from one section of the document to another what the topic's going to be about, so you kind of focus in and hone in on that. It's very helpful in documents like Google Docs and Word, because it creates that navigational structure for you, so then you can then navigate through a document more easily, particularly if it's a longer document. That's, of course, very beneficial to someone using a screen reader, right, David? But it can be beneficial to other people as well. So,
yeah, and for Word documents in particular, using headings can also make yourself more efficient. So when you're creating, say, a syllabus, right, you have 15 different headings, and then you decide you want to make one bolder and a little bit bigger. Now you have to apply that to 15 different headings, right? Your policies, your assignments, all of that. But if you've used headings, all you have to do is change that level of heading once, and it's the magic button. It'll magically change everything in that document that is the same heading to that style. So I really like to use that in order to just be more efficient with my own time when creating Word documents.
Exactly. And that's the idea behind what generative AI can do as far as accessibility is it can help make the content more accessible. You can target more and varied learners, and you can save time doing it. So it's not, because I know that's one of the big things sort of like, that's another thing I have to do. It's a way that lets you, generative AI can reduce the workload, and it actually can benefit you because it lets you sort of look at data from a different perspective. Like as an example, so one of the analogies I use for helping my students understand operating systems is I use the cross section of the Earth. And I sort of explain, everybody understands, the core and the mantle and the crust. And I sort of have them understand the operating system as being sort of similarly structured, where the kernel is sort of the real low level stuff. That's what everything relies on, but you don't really interact with it as an end user. And then above that, at the mantle level, you'll sort of have system libraries and network stacks and that sort of stuff that's higher than the kernel, but still not at the level that the user interacts with. And the crust is the user interface. That's where users actually interact with it, but that sort of relies on everything else. And I actually had ChatGPT. I said, give me an analogy or a write-up that sort of explains this. And so I had it playing around with this idea, and I said, you know what? Take my analogy and give me another analogy. And so it actually gave me one related to the cells and the nucleus of a cell and the cell membrane. And I'm like, actually, I had never thought of that. Again, taking my analogy and pushing it. And so that's one that I'm going to use it as well. And again, using it to let me think about things in a different way. It not only did it make it, was I trying to make things accessible from sort of thinking about it from a different perspective. And I was using that to then draw images of the cross section of the Earth. I was having, because I'm not an amazing, I'm horrible as an artist, but basically I was having it do the write-up for me, and then I was going to have it generate the image for me and that sort of stuff. But I had to go ahead and help me generate that write-up using the cell as an analogy, and go ahead and draw up a image of the cell where it labeled the cell membrane as the interface and the nucleus as the kernel and that sort of stuff. Again, I was creating documents that were more accessible because they were targeting different modalities, but it also was helping me as an instructor sort of analyze the content that I was creating from different perspectives. So it was not only benefiting the students, it was benefiting me as well.
Yeah, similarly, you can use something like a chat GPT to brainstorm ideas on authentic assessments or, different ways of presenting your content, summarizing it, adding for neurodivergent students, as you mentioned, Teresa, providing a summary can be helpful. Providing the why behind why you're using that particular content, and chat GPT can kind of help get that. I know I write dissertations, so chat GPT can sometimes help me make my content more concise.
Can.
Or thinking, I don't think Canvas has. I know Blackboard has built in, like a lot of Gen AI features built in. So there's things like you can generate a rubric right within the LMS, and that kind of makes it a little bit easier. I don't know if Canvas has that. If not, again, you can use ChatGPT or one of those sorts of features for rubrics, for assignments, kind of just thinking through those different ways of presenting the content, engaging with your students, and kind of getting your brain going. And for me, it's also helpful to just not have a blank page. So when I'm creating new content, if I start with something, I can edit it more easily. I also have a lot of mobility issues. So for me, that helps me not have to use, my strength and my arms and hands to type all the time. I can use ChatGPT to do some of that work for me, and then editing it is much easier for me.
No, I completely agree. It's almost like you're talking to a colleague, and you can literally talk to ChatGPT like a colleague if you want to. You can say please and thank you. It responds to those silly, it's human, even though it's still generative AI. But yes, I completely agree with that. It's really what you can think of is the power of what it's capable of doing in a lot of ways.
And in a lot of ways, it's democratized education for people with disabilities themselves. So like I mentioned, my own mobility issues and, the struggle of constantly typing up things or creating from scratch was difficult. So now I can kind of rely on AI to be able to take care of some of that for me, and allows me to save my energy and put it into other areas that I need for the rest of the day. Even with alt text, someone can look at an image description and actually fully understand what's there using one of these tools. So in many ways, it's made accessibility more possible for people with disabilities, made education possible for people with disabilities, but there's a long way to go. And for now, we still are learning and kind of playing with it, which is, to me, the fun part.
Can you talk a little bit about any accessibility issues you found, David, with any of the artificial intelligence tools? Like, for example, one of the things I asked ChatGPT the other day is, how accessible are you? I just said, how accessible are you? What sort of abilities might have difficulty using you? And, it came back with kind of an answer that was kind of a pat answer. But have you found some issues with some of the tools that you've tried to use?
So I found issues with Gemini. So Google wants you to use Google tools, and Gemini really forces you to. It doesn't like me using Gemini without Google Chrome. So that's sort of like Google Sheets and all. It's doable, but they make it's a lot harder to use it without their specific tools. The other thing that I've run into, and actually this is more sort of a thing that Microsoft is doing in general, because I've seen them doing this in Teams and that sort of stuff, but in the Copilot app, where they've sort of, because I'm used to when using a screen reader, and a lot of people don't realize this, well, they're used to sort of and I'm trying to even understand how people sort of perceive pages, but I move through a page in a very linear fashion. I navigate it in that linear structure. And Copilot and Teams sort of take this sort of looping structure. I equate it to, in computer science, circularly linked list. But sometimes it can branch and then loop back on itself via a loop that I didn't know that I could loop back on. And so sometimes I get lost into, I didn't know I was going to loop back to the original starting point somehow there. So I run into some navigability issues there. And then, of course, I run into the issue of, I asked it to do, I know one of the major issues in talking with fellow colleagues when they're trying to create syllabi, and they want their calendar of events to look like a table, but it's really a list of things. And so it should be a list because it's a list, but they want it to look like a table. I was trying to get Microsoft Word to take a list that I had generated and style it. I can do it easily with HTML, but trying to get Microsoft Word to do it, it kept telling me, yeah, I've done it. And I kept taking it to someone that was site and they're like, no, that's still just a list. I'm like, thanks, Microsoft. I've struggled with does it actually do what it's saying it's doing, because I can't tell because I'm using the screen reader to access it. Like the directions that you're given change because the keyboard shortcuts that you have to use using the screen reader alter the way in which certain applications function.
That's good information to know, because a lot of times from the instructor perspective, we don't necessarily think about that. You'll use a tool and you think it should be fine for your students because you're not necessarily coming at it from the same perspectives.